I know early on there was an issue about where to focus efforts, because you could obviously charge consumers for enhanced data about how they, how they compare to other employees and give them, deeper reports, and you do that, or you could take all that data, that asset, and go sell it to businesses. So how did you sort of make the decision about where you were going to focus your efforts?
But I wouldn't say that decision's been wholly made even today. But that's actually the point, and that's what's really interesting about this problem is, so I've as an entrepreneur, I've learned that I think it's just so important to get to a point, and it may take time, and it may take trial and error, or it may take testing, or you may just know. It's important to get to a point to understand, like, does your business require a particular critical mass of traffic, of users, of leads? Does your data set, in our case, require that? For advertising purposes, is it even worth spending time advertising if you don't have 3 million visitors to your website? So you have to figure out from your own business perspective, kind of what those milestones need to be, and then figure out, how do you laser focus on getting there? And so, to Greg's point, PayScale has actually a pretty complicated model. We've got, in essence, a consumer business that has to operate and have a brand and generate traffic and awareness. And then we've got this B2B, sales arm and another whole product set there. And so it can be very complicated. But the problem we had was, gosh, if we could just break even on the consumers, they come in and provide the data, we could sell them some things, we could advertise that thing, we could break even on that, then we'll really have this great engine because we've got to fund everything and then go after the B2B. And that is just wrong. Essentially, if the model is going to be 80% or more, and at the beginning, maybe 100% of revenue could be coming from this back-end business-to-business offering, which is ultimately companies paying for a data asset, then why not, when you're just starting out and we have so little resources, be focused on that and focus on generating a critical mass of consumers and users without inhibiting that and trying to get them to pay or advertising and clouding the user experience and that sort of thing. And from a management and growth and kind of resources perspective, it can be a distraction.
I want to focus on this issue and ask maybe even Sapir from his IMDb days too, to just, I think if you're sort of saying what's the #1 issue for most companies on the web, for example, it's this idea that of creating and capturing value. So every site you go to on the web, I would argue, creates some value. Otherwise you wouldn't be there. It might not be a lot of value, but you're there, that they have some kind of proposition to you that made you come to that site, and they're doing some value creation. I think where 99% of companies fall down is they create this value, but they're unable to capture their fair share of the value they create, especially on the web, right? And so one of the questions then is, how do you, so here in a case like PayScale, you say, hey, we're creating this value, how do you decide, sort of, let's take the freemium model, how much to offer for free, and then when you start to charge? Maybe, Sapir, you'd have an insight in terms of how you thought about it with like IMDb. We were talking about that actually in the hall a little bit.
Yeah, so on IMDb, if you're familiar with that service, primarily we made it for consumers. But it had a lot of information that was relevant to people who were in the industry, except we had not organized it in the most optimal fashion for them. And as we started the monetization journey after we hit a few million unique visitors, one natural monetization was on the advertising front, which we did. But we kept getting requests in our customer service from people who kept complaining and willing to basically pay us for a certain service. So it wasn't basically an aha moment from us. It was basically our customer saying, hey, here are certain problems that I'm trying to solve. So for example, if you're a movie executive and you get a Western genre movie on your desk, and you have to decide whether to fund it or not. And they will spend basically tens of thousands of dollars in consulting dollars to figure out whether to make a Western genre movie or not. Versus we could mine our data and actually tell them that in the last 10 years, the best Western genre movie, it performed $15 million or $20 million, meaning it's a dog, don't invest in it. So those things were basically very expensive, and it required basically taking advantage of a handful of people who will provide basically their wisdom and insights as opposed to very database stuff that we could offer them. So we actually went in and actually talked to different people who work in movie industries, people who are in marketing department, who want to figure out how to market a DVD from the insights that were generated from the theatrical side. And we kind of collected those scenarios and said, can we take those scenarios and launch a site at a price point that they can afford and really basically go for the masses. So instead of charging $5 grand against the 20 grand consulting study, let's just go in and basically come up with like a $5 product or a $12 product and then let people figure it out, because for $5 product, if it creates one insight for them once a month, that's the price of basically a Starbucks coffee, and which is what we use basically to sell it. And then we launched on that journey, and can't tell you basically the numbers right now. It's in high six figures that people basically are participating in IMDb Pro. And once you basically have a critical mass of the customers, they push you to keep evolving your product. That's extremely key. Like whenever you start any journey, once it's time for you to start capturing value, you really need to find a customer or series of customers who are going to be extremely demanding. Which is quite the opposite of actually when you think about actually if they're demanding, they care, and they will help you basically kind of really take your product to a level where it basically becomes accessible to the masses, and which is what we did over here. We actually went in and did a deal with the studio. We just gave them away the product, but they helped us define a product, which then they basically could be utilized by lots of people.
I mean, it's such an interesting question too. Anyone know the percentage of users that Zynga, one of the most successful companies now, probably the most successful gaming company at the moment, percentage of users that they monetize?
It's 2%.
Yeah, a little bit more, but yeah. They're the best at it, that's the thing. They're like double what everyone else is. So it's interesting that you know, 98% of their users don't pay them anything, and yet they're making, you know, $1 billion over. Anyone else sort of want to, at least on this idea, maybe Joe, back to you, Reggie.
Oh, there's a question back there, but I did.
Craig, did you say 2% conversion rate or no?
Only 2% of their users pay anything.
Thank you.
Greg, same thing with Craigslist, right? I mean, Craigslist only charges for apartment rentals and job postings. Now it's personal matters, but, because the feds have forced them to do that. But, you know, they throw off so much cash.
I think, let me give some color. 2%, because on IMDb it was similar. Because back when I was running it, we had grown it to 50 million people, so 100,000 plus basically gives you that conversion. But that 2%, we have a paying relationship with the consumers. But the remaining 98%, we're indirectly monetizing them through advertising.
For advertising.
So same thing with Zynga also.
Yeah,
2% are buying virtual
as
goods
does, yeah.
with their credit card, but the remaining 98% are getting monetized some other ways.
Although Zynga doesn't do a great job at making the vast majority of their money on that 2%, which is
Yeah.
amazing. But those 2% end up spending a lot of money. Joe, so how did you then, as you were thinking about your decide, so it sounds like you were sort of fighting this battle of, hey, we need all this data, we don't want to put barriers in, at the same time, we'd like to make a little bit of money from these consumers. How'd you decide, you know, what to charge? What were the metrics and tests you were using to decide, you know, when to start charging at what, you know,
Yeah.
and how did you go through that?
It's interesting because it's a matter of observing, right? And so, you know, as you're kind of grokking your way through this process, we had some inputs. And one of those inputs was we were getting leads from businesses saying, wow, I've never seen such amazing data. How can I get my hands on it? I need to price a new a factory I'm building in somewhere in Minnesota. You know, we get these leads, these emails, right? And so that was our first clue that, you know, might be onto something in terms of the value of the data. And then on the consumer side, you know, we kept trying to figure out, so there's this notion of freemium, you know, or free versus pay and that type of thing. And actually it is important sometimes, I think, from a branding perspective to exude value. And so one tactic of that could be, you have a premium offering, maybe not very many people actually use it. And it may not even drive the core value or a growth of your business in any way, but it gives that perception that the free thing, is going to be good. There's this better thing available, and this company is legit. So we actually were experimenting a lot with this notion of how much to make free, how much to charge for on these consumers. And it was a matter of testing and measuring. And we tried, all these different price points, for CEOs and executives, should it be $79 a report? For admin, should it be $9.95, that type of thing, and free. But interestingly, what happened was one of our tests was just take away the price altogether. Don't have the option anywhere on the page, and put in big letters, free. And our conversion rate went up overnight, 35% just on that, right? So we were able to measure a scenario where we're looking at the B2B leads coming in going, we could sell that data to them. And over on the consumer side, gosh, we get this great boost in our data collection if we just give it away for free. Sure, we'll hold out and we'll say that there's this premium offering for consumers, but we don't expect any people to buy it. And that ended up formulating kind of like our sweet spot in terms of managing conversion rates and collecting the max amount of data and to be able to sell their businesses. But it was actually, it took a couple of years to get there.
Any comments, I think, from folks on the MSN days in terms of how you thought about free versus paid and monetizing and basically capturing some of the value that something like an MSN. I know MSN actually never did it well, So any lessons learned from that experience?
Well, certainly, one of the things you can learn from an MSN experience is if you don't have a billing system set up properly, you could be creating value and by doing such a bad job on billing, create a perception that maybe you're not creating value because you're not charging anybody for it, or you don't care enough about it to spend the amount of time on it. So that's one thing you can learn from there. But I also wanted to comment, interesting hearing how some of these more esoteric pricing dynamics were developed. And I'm in an industry where it's a lot more concrete because you're competing against businesses that people have been trying to measure for years, like advertising, with cost per thousands and things like that. And then you come with a business model that for the first time ever, they can calculate a true ROI on their investment. And if you can prove your ROI based on this industry that's been along for a long time, it creates a pricing dynamic for you where you don't have to think it through too much. Like ours is basically whatever you think your close rate's going to be, the cost you pay for our leads is going to make that a much better proposition for you than any other form of trying to get a customer. And so it gives you a pricing capability that really allows you to drive value in a marketplace. And that's another way to do it. It's a little more quantitative and a little more exacting. And particularly if you can find a large enough market, it's a good way to come in at an industry because you know there's an established pricing paradigm that you can beat.